Good afternoon, I guess. Good morning, good evening, depending on when you're listening to this, Bucknutters and Ohio State fans. I'm Patrick Murphy, and you're here listening to another Bucknuts Happy Hour. We took last week off because we needed a bit of a break and there was other stuff going on, but I certainly wanted to do one this week, and then we got news today that I felt like was too good to not discuss. I'm drinking water today, which is the first time I think on a Bucknuts Happy Hour episode I haven't had at least one beer. A little bit under the weather, feeling fine, but figure it's probably better to just have some water as opposed to the usual afternoon beer. We're recording this. Excuse me, cheers. We're recording this on Monday afternoon, January 16th. We got word from CJ Stroud earlier today that he will, in fact, head to the NFL draft. He is officially declared. We're going to discuss that. We are probably going to be joined by Tim Hall from 97.1 The Fan and the Buckeye Show here in a little bit. He was having some computer issues, so we'll probably get some of his takes on CJ, but we'll talk about Stroud. We'll talk about what this means for the Buckeyes and going forward, obviously the quarterbacks that are going to compete for that job. But we'll also dive into the second half of the show, dive into some of the other guys who have made decisions this offseason, who they are, who's going, who's coming back, what that kind of means for the Buckeyes. And I've written some of that on Bucknuts. If you've seen some of that stuff already, there's been some content about that. So, yeah, one thing I want to hear from you guys throughout the show, and I'll bring this up a couple of times, I'm curious what everybody's opinion, how you will remember CJ Stroud. So throw that in the comment section. We'll discuss some of them as we go along. This is a quarterback who obviously put up some really good numbers throughout his Ohio State career, but also will have the fact that he didn't beat Michigan and he didn't win a Big Ten title, did get to a college football playoff. So let's dive into Stroud. Made the announcement today. First, I think we should talk about why this may have taken so long for CJ. Today, being Monday, is the final day that early NFL entrants can put their name in. They still have technically a 72-hour window to pull their name back out if they want, but they have to get their names in, paperwork filed with the NFL by the end of the day, I believe today. So we were waiting on CJ. Everyone was waiting on CJ, and the longer we waited, the more the conversation began to circulate and speculate about, will CJ come back? And I know there were a lot of rumors floating out there. I want to tell you what I heard, what I was told, and kind of how I see this playing out. Comes from both information I was told by people that I trust close to the program and whatnot, but also kind of some putting pieces together here. Look, CJ had a decision to make. This wasn't as clear cut as it probably should have been, and I think there are a number of reasons for that. I think that he had to consider the financial aspect, the fact that there's NIL at this point, and then he also had to really, look at what he's done at Ohio State and what he wanted to do at Ohio State. And real quick, we're going to bring in Timmy here. Tim, you made it.
Hey, what's going on, Patrick?
Not much. I told the people that you would be here when you could. You were having technical issues, but I'm glad to see you.
It's good to see you too, brother. And I mean, here we are, right? Just a shocking announcement today that CJ Stroud is going to do the normal and sensible thing and go to the best place in the world to display his craft. I can't imagine why he would have ever done that. It's another one of these examples where, to me, it just goes to show us we cannot really get inside CJ Stroud's head. We can't try to think about what he's thinking about. We look at things through a different lens. We think of things in terms of, but what about not beating Michigan? What about not winning a Big Ten championship as a starting quarterback? And while I'm sure those things do matter to him, but he's already compartmentalized this. As I was going through this past week and people were talking about, this being here or there and all the noise on social media and people thinking what they want to think and these ungodly NIL numbers that were just completely false. You go back and look at that man when he left the field against Georgia. I don't know if you were down there, Patrick, or got to look at him with your own eyes, but that told you everything you needed to know. I mean, he's doing like for those of you watching on YouTube, he's kind of tapping his chest. He's pointing the fingers up. He was done. Like, he already came to that realization that if they lost this game, that it was my last game wearing an Ohio State uniform. You could see that in his face. You could basically go back and pick that out of any one of his quotes after the Michigan game. After that game, like, it was done. And look, like, I think the one thing for me too that kind of really just pulled it right out of my chest when it comes to sitting on our side of the fence and thinking about athletes and why they should come back or why it would be beneficial for them to come back. First of all, I can't even come up with many reasons in the pro column for CJ to do that. But when Malachi Branham left last year, it was just for me, you know what? I'm out on this. I'm just going to assume when there's a chance for these guys to be first round talents at whatever, they're gone. Just expect them to be gone. And then again, this case for CJ, like, times it by 10 compared to what Malachi Branham's case was in a Buckeye basketball sense. But that's kind of where I was on that. So that tells you, Pat, where I am on Bryce Sensabaugh. Not to completely change the subject on you, but I'm already he's a foregone conclusion that he's gone as well. It'd just be great if he did come back.
Yeah, well, that's a podcast for later down the road when we dive into more basketball and get towards the end of the hoop season. Look, I was saying as you popped in here, I was told last week that there was more consideration than normal that CJ was thinking about coming back. Now, I also know people at Ohio State were preparing for life without CJ next year. The assumption in that building was, we're moving on. We have a quarterback competition, all that. So CJ might have, he's back home in California right now. There's been some videos of him throwing out there with, I think, at the Elite 11 facility or something. But I think that I know that there was more consideration paid to coming back than probably any other quarterback that's been in this situation before. I think that NIL played a part in it. I think some of that legacy talk, because CJ brought it up on his own after the Michigan game, that, as you mentioned, he was talking almost in past tense as if he was already gone. But that, look, I know how people will think that I never beat Michigan. I never won a Big Ten title. So he's aware of that. And I think that gave him some pause. I also think that you can't just, assume because a guy doesn't announce right away that he's giving it a lot of consideration. I mean, there are other things, he's busy with other stuff. Justin Fields didn't announce until the final day of, the final day that he was allowed. Addison from USC, who's a surefire high pick, just announced, a short while before CJ did. So,
right.
Look, it's not always that he's sitting out there and weighing it, but I do think, from what I was told, that there was some consideration about it. And, I then heard I think it was Thursday or Friday of last week, that he was definitely, he had his mind made up. He'd gotten his ducks in a row in terms of agencies and things like that. And I put that on our message board there. But look, I think it's a weird time. And I think I was just listening. I was driving around listening to your guys' station, The Fan, and T-Bone was talking about Andrew Luck came back at Stanford for, I think it was his fourth year, but his redshirt junior year. And, so it's happened before, but it was ultimately not going to happen with CJ.
But as you bring up Luck, and I don't know what T-Bone was saying about that, we actually brought him up on the Buckeye show last week. As I recall, that situation with Luck, he was never coming back. Like, he was one of those rare cases where he was going to graduate and then he was going to go on. Everybody knew after that, that when he first got hot, when he was even eligible, he could come out and be the number one overall pick. Yeah. But Andrew had never said that. Like, that was just something that everybody else put on him and said, but dude, you're being dumb. And that's what I hate. I hate that when someone is going to go into someone else's body or mind and say you're making a dumb decision when people have their own agendas, So that was the right decision for Andrew Luck. I'm sure there was some kind of insurance policy. That was a life choice that he chose, knowing everything that was at stake money-wise down the road. But I get what you're saying there. But I remember that one differently because
Yeah.
he wasn't saying that he was going to go or being totally quiet about it. And people were wondering, walking on eggshells, is he going to leave or is he going to come back? And it shocked us. That was always like a luck was coming back. And then after the next draft or after the next season, he was still he was still good. He played well. He didn't get hurt and he was the number 1 overall pick. So I guess there's just an example there of how it could still work out for you if you had it in your heart that you were a supreme talent. And maybe we will see that one day, right? With NIL. Clearly, I don't think you're at the point where these collectives or anybody is going to be able to put up the kind of money that you're going to be able to see with NFL first round money, especially when you look at the top picks. It's I do wonder when we're going to get back to, say, when Sam Bradford was scoring what 50 million and then it took a big dip with what the rookie salary structure was. I wonder if NIL will ever like get to a point where it kind of makes the NFL want to supercharge what they're, I mean, as the economy, does what it does, naturally the salaries are going to continue to go back up for the NFL. But I wonder what that scale is going to continue to look like if we do see some decisions where big time stars stay the extra year in college football when people in the NFL are expecting to get their paws on them. I don't think it's going to be too big of a deal because football is still a sport where you got to stay 3 years before you're even eligible. And we're seeing a guy like Marvin Harrison Jr., even CJ Stroud last year. You're seeing guys that are good enough, physical enough, talented enough to even go after 2 years, but they're just not allowed. So, the itch I think is still going to be there after 3 for a lot of guys.
Yeah, I think in order for that to really become a thing, and maybe you will see an NIL deal and a guy who, just loves college, and there may be a situation where it all works out. And frankly, CJ might have been that guy if things had fallen. He's not your normal college football player, though it was always his dream to play in the NFL. But I think, to your point, if there's ever enough money to keep a guy in college, I think would have to change to where the schools or you're allowed to make these players directly paid from the school or from, something like that, where they essentially become contracted employees and they're not really student. I think a lot of that would have to shift to have that much money to be able to give to a guy. Yeah.
Yeah.
And so I don't know, I don't know when that happens. But yeah, with the Luck example, I mean, he was very different. Look, he retired in the prime of his career, right? Like that's a unique example. It has happened. Guys who were expected to be high picks have come back before. You see it in basketball from time to time too. What's his name at Kentucky came back after being National Player of the Year last year. So at some point, I imagine we'll see this with NIL. But yeah. Let me ask you this, Tim, and I put this out there for people in our comment section, so feel free to keep throwing that in there. But how are you going to remember CJ Stroud? Because it's an interesting legacy that he leaves. Numbers, great. Heisman finalists, he's, depending on how you define it, either the first or second guy in Ohio State history to be a 2-time finalist. And there's all that on the individual side. Team side, obviously, you do get the college football playoff at the end there, and what a great performance CJ had in that game against Georgia. But you obviously don't beat Michigan. And, I don't know if it's entirely fair to put wins and losses on a quarterback, but we see it happen all the time. So how do you feel like you're going to remember CJ down the line?
I'm going to remember him fondly. I think that's the most important thing, is just when you think of a guy, do you have, positive or negative vibes about him? And first things first is I got a positive feeling about him, and just the way that he played the game and just how much fun it was to watch this guy play the position when he was in a groove. This dude was a streaky player. And when he started spinning that rock, man, it was fun to watch. It really was. Like you talk about a guy that can throw dimes, that can drop the football into tight windows. Yeah. Special arm talent from CJ Stroud. Everything that you just said on top of that, like when you start to break it down or you get into those debates with your buddies about your top 5 Buckeye quarterbacks of all time, that those kind of discussions to me do become a little bit more than just what the player was. You almost have to have a separate ranking for me when you talk about pure talent at the quarterback spot, because if we're doing that, I think it's 2 guys, and that's the last 2. It's Justin Fields and CJ Stroud, if you're having that conversation. And then Dwayne with his one special season, that comes into play too. And for those, I mean, you talk about, a few different things: time given to the program, and how many years did you spend as a starter? 2 seasons is certainly a whole lot more than just one, if that's all you're able to give here to Ohio State before you make your own personal free choice to go on to the NFL, which is totally fine, but it's just going to adjust how you do these rankings and whatnot, in my mind. And so, all-time Buckeye quarterback, when you look at everything in a team sport example, it is tough, Pat, because he did not start at quarterback and beat Michigan. He did not start at quarterback and win a Big Ten championship. So there's the caveat there, as he's one of the more talented guys we've ever seen play the position here in Ohio State football history. But he missed 2 of the key things in both of his years as a starter that a lot of his predecessors were able to get. And unfortunate as it is, CJ knows it. He's a grown-up, and you could kind of see it on his face when he was making those decisions to leave, and he knew it was going to be this way. You just have to accept it. And I think the way that he played in that Georgia game, finally, ducking his head down and running a little bit when the team needed him to, that changed a lot of minds. It kind of pulled me back around, just with how I will have those positive vibes and good memories about CJ, just when we just think about him as a player.
Yeah, I think if he goes out, if that's a loss to Georgia by 14 points and he doesn't have the greatest game, or even if he does and just doesn't run like that, I think the running really, that was the criticism, right? Fair or not, that was what people always, said about him, was he's not willing to do that stuff when you need him to. And, I think you can be a really good quarterback without doing that. But in today's college football, especially, and even in the NFL to some degree, picking up those 3 yards, so to speak, are important. But I think the way he went out in that game, because it's the last memory people will have, is important to his legacy. I don't know if in person at least, watching some of the throws he made, and I'm happy to say that I was at every single game he played as a starting college quarterback. There's some ridiculous throws out there, and obviously he's got receivers, and we know that kind of debate that happened around Justin Fields and whatnot. But you still have to make some of those throws and then put it on the money. And then the way he was throwing on the move in the college football playoff this year, finding Marvin Harrison for those 2 touchdowns and whatnot. Justin Fields was really, really good at Ohio State, and I would have loved to see him have that full 2020 season to see what numbers he could have put up. But CJ's just got that arm, and that's what I'm going to remember the most, is just the way he could spin that ball and get it to where he wanted. It did bite him a few times. He was willing to take some risks, and I think he had 12 career interceptions, 6 in each season. So he did get bit a little bit by trying to fit it in to tight windows sometimes. But I think you live with that, especially at a place like Ohio State where you're usually the better team. I will have very positive memories of him. And, of CJ the person, he was a great guy to deal with. And I know fans don't often get that interaction. I don't know how much you ever interacted with him, Tim, but I know obviously you listened to his press conferences and whatnot. I really liked CJ. And, he could be a little confrontational sometimes when he disagreed with the running stuff and, kind of pushed back on some things. But for the most part, he was always great to talk to. I went and found him after the press conference after the Michigan game. I thought, that may be the last post-game press conference we had with him. Turns out we had the Heisman and we had another one. But, I just told him thanks for always, after every loss, he got up there and talked. And I know you're the quarterback. You're supposed to do that. But it's, that means something to someone like me who's trying to do my job. And he was always great at giving answers and being honest and breaking things down. And, I think he's going to be very successful at the next level.
Yeah, when you start talking about CJ and what his NFL future is going to be like, I really did need to see that performance against Georgia. And I know you don't want to ever put too much or too little into one game, but it was a big game, right? And even with Georgia's defense, losing a lot of guys from last year's team to the NFL, they still have NFL dudes on that defense. So anytime you play the best team in the SEC, that defense is likely going to have 3, 4, 5, 6 NFL dudes, even though that Georgia one wasn't as good, like I just said, as last year. It's like a couple of those throws that he made. You mentioned the 2 touchdown passes to Marvin Harrison Jr. Those are the type of throws that make you believe that he can stick around a little bit longer than some of these other Ohio State quarterbacks that we thought would as a starter. And I know jury's still out on Justin Fields and how he's going to go.
Yeah.
Had an electrifying season this year, but still, with as horrible as the Bears are, I'm not all the way there yet, like some Buckeye fans are that watch the Bears kind of impartially. But CJ, I think he's got the best shot as far as you have, Bryce Young, and then to me it kind of takes a big dip, and people think Will Levis is going to be all that, and then you got the Florida quarterback, and I'm not certain about all these guys getting to that second contract and getting a big time second contract, but I think I got the most stock in CJ Stroud right now if I had to go with one, just because the grit that he showed me in that game against Georgia and how he could throw and make those tough throws under duress. That is always going to be life in the NFL. I mean, you get a couple injuries, like look what Joe Burrow was going through last night when 3 of his offensive linemen are out. The one task for them was to rebuild that O-line, and then Jonah Williams goes out. Not saying he's the greatest anyway, but was going to be a little drop off back to Jackson Carman there. You have to just live your life that way, and you got to get back up, dust yourself off, and not be afraid to step up in the pocket and get hit a little bit and throw it and take off and get those 3 yards rushing or 5 yards, whatever it is. So the whole performance just sort of reinforced him for me, that I think he's got a pretty good shot wherever he goes.
Well, let's look forward. CJ, he's on his way out, which means Ohio State will need a new quarterback. And I think most people by now know the names that are going to be in this competition, but just in case you don't pay attention that closely, Kyle McCord, who's been CJ's backup the last 2 years, former 5-star kid out of Philly, went to high school with Marvin Harrison Jr., so there's that connection there. Devin Brown, out from Utah, originally from California, who was a freshman this past season, didn't play a ton, was really kind of real late in games after Kyle McCord came out. And, those will really be the 2 that are going to compete. Obviously, Lincoln Kienholz is going to be a freshman. There's been talk about whether he was going to enroll early or not. I don't think he is on campus yet, but I could be mistaken on that. I'd have to check with Bill Kurlick, who keeps track of all that stuff for us. I know it was kind of back and forth on what he was going to do. But either way, I think it's going to come down to – I think most people think it's going to come down to McCord, Devin Brown. Tim, I have my thoughts on this, but you've seen – McCord a decent amount. He's got one start, which was in 2020 or in 2021, and then Devin Brown a little bit. What's kind of your read on this really early on, and as we talk about this quarterback competition that's going to take place this offseason?
Well, my read on it at this stage of the game, Patrick, is we're kind of entering the most interesting offseason that we've had yet under Ryan Day, for a guy who's really his number one strength as a head coach is finding quarterbacks, developing the quarterbacks. And it's a great thing to have. Like, it's a great strength to have with your head coach because, right or wrong, you can't win in college football unless you have a great quarterback. You can't win in any level of football if you don't have a great QB. So, it's a lot less of a sure thing when we were at that offseason after Justin Fields. It was CJ Stroud. Like, the talk was there. Right. It was, wherever you looked, whether that was just buzz on social media or real insight from people that were close to the team, or just looking at this dude and knowing what he was, knowing what his sort of trajectory was going to be. It was kind of a sure thing that CJ was not only going to take over as QB1, but he was going to be really, really freaking good too. It was just a matter of how good. Is he going to be as good as Justin Fields, slightly worse, or even better? That's really where you were. It was a pretty good starting block. So I don't think either of these guys start off at that point. But that's not to say that, as they get the ball and as they get acclimated into this system, that they don't gain confidence, that they don't lean on the strengths of this team. But if you go back and watch, Kyle McCord and if you go back to his very first throws in college football, when it was against Akron, he had a shaky first series. That ball was going everywhere. But again, I'm not going to hold him to that. That was his first few throws as a college quarterback. So I think Devin Brown provides maybe a little bit more of a running element, and I think this is going to be more of a dogfight than maybe the star rating suggests, just because Kyle McCord was a 5-star QB and threw the ball to Marvin Harrison Jr. when he was in high school, and he's got one more year under his belt. I'm not convinced yet, Patrick, that this is automatically his gig going into next year, and no one from Ohio State's going to say that publicly either. But what is your read on that? Are you kind of leaving this door cracked open for Devin Brown to be the guy in 23, or is it McCord all the way?
The door is definitely open for Devin Brown. Everything that I've heard about these guys, both. First of all, I want to say I know it. You're definitely right on kind of the read with when Stroud was taking over versus right now, and I don't know why that is, because I know that the Ohio State staff has been impressed with both of these kids at times in practice, and obviously they just haven't had a ton of experience. I know Ryan Day would have liked to get Kyle McCord some more, actual throwing the ball in game situations, but he also doesn't want to run up the score on teams. But this to me is as real of a quarterback competition that Ohio State has had probably since the year after the 2014 national championship game when you had Cardale and JT coming back. And, that one was weird.
What about Joey B and Dwayne? That one wasn't real?
I felt like that one obviously got settled early on. Like, to me, this goes into fall camp. Unless one guy just really, takes it by the reins. I think you're right. That was definitely a real quarterback competition. I just feel like
he had kind of the hand injury that kind of made it tough for Joe to even get fully in. I think it would have been much, much more of one. But you're right. You're right. If you go back before that.
Yeah, because Dwayne had that game where he came in against Michigan and looked good. And there was talk about would he start in the Big Ten championship game because JT was hurt in the Michigan game and all that. And I think just Dwayne had a lot of buzz around him just because of that arm and everything. And I think this is like legitimately these two guys are going to start at zero, even though Kyle McCord, there's film on him and things. He's been around the program, but I think they're going to start at about the same spot, and one of them is really going to have to earn it. I was interested when Dave Biddle talked to Devin Brown, and that story's up on our site. It was up while we were in Atlanta, but at media days, Devin Brown talked about while CJ was gone for the Heisman, how he stepped up. He felt like he stepped up as a leader and kind of filled that CJ Stroud void. Now that's just Devin Brown's perspective on it. I'm sure if you talk to Kyle McCord, he would say something similar. But interesting to hear a freshman, willing to put himself into that leadership role early on.
What does that mean? What does that mean? Stepped up into a role when CJ went to New York?
Yeah, when he was, when they're practicing and for the bowl prep, and I don't remember exactly how he said it, but the wording, is just usually you as a freshman, I think you kind of take the back seat, and especially when there's another quarterback in that room who's been in the program 2 years. It just grabbed my attention that he wants to be the leader of this team, even when there's an older guy who he knows he's going to compete with. And, so between that and between what I've been told to some degree about, the possibility that Ohio State would like to have more mobility at the quarterback position, all things being equal, obviously. And Kyle McCord is not an unathletic guy. Let's be clear about that. But as you said, I think Devin Brown is more in that running quarterback mold with an arm. I'm not saying Devin Brown's going to win the job. I'm just saying, like you said, I don't think just because Kyle McCord was the 5-star kid and has been in the program longer, he's the shoe-in to win the job. One of these guys is going to have to earn it. And, that's going to encompass everything they do this offseason.
I saw somebody comment back there, it just drifted upward though. And I agree with that sentiment that Steven was saying, play the best guy. And put the best quarterback on the field. 100% agree. This is big time college football. Just because you got a year extra in the program and you feel you've been waiting for your shot, talk to anybody in any job. Sometimes how long you've been somewhere ain't going to really matter. And if you dwell on things like that for most of your life, that you just feel you earned something because you're sitting in a certain chair and you've been waiting the best and you've been I don't know, good boy or girl. I'm not saying that's Kyle McCord anyway, but I'm just saying I agree with that. That would suck for Kyle, but if these guys duke it out and Devin's clearly the better guy, I am kind of in the school of thought that if you cannot decide, like if two guys and you're going to bed every night thinking, man, like both of these guys give us an incredible chance to win. They're both gamers. I like what they're both about. If all things are equal, everything's equal, maybe you take seniority as a tipping point. But you'll see rookies outplay veteran quarterbacks in the league. They're just more talented, and you got to play him. You got to make that call. And Devin spent a year in here too, so he's a Buckeye right now. So let's go. Let's battle it out.
Well, and to your point, I think too, if everything is equal and those guys are, arm wise and whatnot, look about the same, do you lean towards that athleticism side to have a guy who can get outside the pocket and do some things more so than what you've had the last couple of years? Yeah, potentially.
As long as Devin can throw it. And I mean,
right.
his high school film suggests that he can certainly put the football into a tight window as well. But I do, I would expect either one of these guys. I have less of an inkling than I did, say, with CJ or with Dwayne when he took over or when Justin came in. I would expect a game of struggles, like a game of struggles that we're not really used to seeing around here. Are you kind of with me there? Because it's just, I like both these quarterbacks and they do have weapons. It just doesn't feel like you have a automatic superstar Heisman type quarterback until we actually see something. I'm just saying, like in that first 4 games, right? And
it's not an easy first 4 games.
The Notre Dame game is going to be the 4th one. So
but you start it with a Big Ten game on the road at Indiana, and I know true. Indiana's
that's
not
true.
but it's not, that's not a home game at noon against Western Michigan. I mean, that's a Big Ten game, and the one thing I don't want to see coming out of this is I don't want to get to that Indiana game, and I think even earlier than that, but I don't think you start the year with 2 quarterbacks. I can't stand when that happens. I think somebody needs to win the job.
I'm with you.
I don't know how you get through all off season and you're like, well, no one's won the job yet. We're going to play them both. I just know I don't think that ever works. So I think you've got to find somebody, but that's on the quarterbacks too. They have to do it. And I do think this will go into fall camp, and I don't think it will just be Ryan Day saying we're taking it in the fall camp. All right. Last thing I want to ask you, Tim, before I let you go, because I know you got stuff with the fan. If you're looking in your crystal ball, and obviously there's a lot of factors here, where does CJ Stroud end up in the NFL draft this year?
Oh God. I was looking at one of these mocks. I think it was a Pro Football Focus one earlier. And are you also a little bit surprised at some of these having him as the 3rd, possibly 4th quarterback selected? I can't see it. I don't understand that, but these NFL scouts and these GMs, they think what they think, and they see the size of a Will Levis and they see the arm of an Anthony Richardson at Florida, and I understand that, but I don't see how CJ Stroud is not either, the 1st or the 2nd quarterback taken off the board. What about you? I just haven't given this a good hard study yet, Patrick. I'll probably do it right after I'm done here since you caught me. But we're looking with the Bears have the number 1 pick, so they'll trade out of that. Somebody will move up. You would think that the Houston Texans would go up there and get him, and a lot of people are saying Bryce Young right now. So what's it going to be? Is it going to be the Colts after that?
Yeah, potentially. I think CJ, when he gets to the combine, assuming he's 100% healthy, I think he's going to wow a lot of people because, Bryce Young measurables aren't great.
He's 6 feet tall.
He is 6 feet tall, but he just doesn't look, I've seen them stand next to each other at the Heisman 2 years ago. CJ Stroud looks like an NFL quarterback, and Bryce Young looks more like the new age NFL quarterbacks. Now, that's not to say he won't be very good and he won't impress people and maybe he'll be the first quarterback, but I think CJ is going to do a lot of good things at the combine. I think he'll interview well. I think he can change some minds there. I didn't watch a lot of Will Levis. I have a friend who's a Kentucky fan who swears he's a better quarterback than CJ Stroud. But that's just somebody I know that really likes the Wildcats. To me, I don't know how he's not the second quarterback off Richardson from Florida. I was really impressed with him early on in the season, and then he fell off, and obviously the throwing is a big issue there. So, look, CJ showed what he could do against Georgia, and Bryce Young has obviously played Georgia as well in the past, but I don't know. To me, CJ is the best pro prospect Ohio State's had. Dwayne was that guy before. But
it comes down to what we think and know of him as Ohio State guys.
Sure.
And there's definite bias that you almost have to remove yourself from because we've been watching every single throw.
Absolutely.
Neither you or I can sit here and say that we've done that for Bryce or for Will Levis, certainly for Richardson. So I understand that. So I almost I know what I would think, and then I'd probably drop back a couple because so many different sources and sites are viewing it this way. So it's got to be somewhat of a balance between what we think we know as guys that have covered and watched CJ for every throw of his career. So maybe I will put in a prediction of, say, the Raiders. I know that's one that's kind of going around too. The Vegas Raiders, somewhere in that top 10. I don't know where they're picking or if they could trade up a little bit, but maybe somewhere in that 5 to 10 spot with the Las Vegas Raiders at this point, because they clearly need a guy.
Yeah, well, we'll see. A lot will change between now and late April when the draft happens, and there'll be a lot of different projections and teams being talked about. Trades will happen and whatnot. All right, Timmy, get out of here. Thank you for joining the happy hour this week and talking some CJ Stroud with us.
You bet, buddy. Thanks for everybody checking it out here today.
All right, I'll talk to you later this week.
All right, see you, Pat.
All right, bye. All right, well, that was the first more than half of the Bucknuts Happy Hour today. That was our CJ Stroud segment of the show. I want to dive into some of the other guys from Ohio State who have made decisions about their future, be it going to the NFL draft or coming back. If you've been paying attention, Ohio State's kind of got a mixed bag of decisions. Most of them, I don't think, were very surprising. They've had 5 guys that are early entrants into the NFL draft. Safety Ronnie Hickman, who told us before the Michigan game he was going pro. Paris Johnson, I think everyone expected him. The left tackle is a 2-year starter at Ohio State. Jackson Smith and Jigba, everyone expected that, especially with the injury he's had this year. CJ Stroud, who we've talked about throughout this show, and then Luke Whippler, the center, and that's the one that I think a lot of people were surprised about. Luke, yes, a 2-year starter at center, but I don't know if he was. I think a lot of people looked at some of his film and thought this is a guy that can and should come back and play another year at Ohio State. Played well, don't get me wrong, but I think he could have benefited. But there's a lot that goes into the decisions to go pro other than just, am I ready? And these guys get evaluations from the NFL. Basically, the way they do it now is it tells you first round pick, go back to college type of thing. And so I don't know what Luke Whippler was told, but he decided he was ready to go. Out of those guys, obviously CJ Stroud is going to be a big miss. Ronnie Hickman is a guy who had what I will call an inconsistent season. I think there were times where he was really good. There were other times when he struggled quite a bit. You can look back. I mean, even in the college football playoff game against Georgia, I don't know if he was already, because he'd already decided that he was headed, if his head wasn't completely in it. There were at times I thought, where is the player we saw 2 years ago that led the Ohio State in tackles? But there were also some really good moments for Ronnie Hickman. So, I'll be interested to see where he ends up and what his NFL career looks like. Jackson Smith and Jigba, interesting situation. I think coming into the season, I would have said surefire, first round, top 15, somewhere around where Chris Olave and Garrett Wilson went last year, but not playing this season certainly will affect his draft stock. He's one that obviously won't affect Ohio State nearly as much as these other guys, because Ohio State knows what life is like without Jackson Smith and Jigba, with him only playing in really 3 halves of football and in 3 separate games this year after that injury against Notre Dame. So, those guys, look, they're certainly losses. I think you could throw DeJuan Jones in there as well. Technically, he had eligibility left, but took part in senior day and those things. If you're Ohio State, and I wanted to bring this up with Tim while we were talking about CJ, but we went off on a different topic. Not only now do you have to replace CJ, you have to replace both tackles and now your center. And I have a story that'll come out later this evening about the offensive line and what that's going to look like next year. And I said in it, this is almost, it's one of the most important offseason questions, decisions, however you want to phrase it, for Ohio State, because you can have the quarterback, and Ohio State will obviously have to figure that out. You'll have the running backs, the receivers, tight end, Cade Stover's back. But what you don't know that you have is an offensive line. There's some options there. You have Matthew Jones back. You have Donovan Jackson, who is going into his 3rd year, wasn't eligible for the NFL draft yet, back. Those two give you a starting point, but now you've got to figure out, okay, who's going to play tackles? Do you move Donovan Jackson out to left tackle? Do you keep him at left guard? Where do you play Josh Fryer, who played a good amount of snaps as kind of the 6th offensive lineman this year? Does he play probably the right tackle, but could he move to the left tackle? And then, Zen Mikowski, is he your other tackle? If you're moving the guards around, you have to replace the guards. You got a lot of young guys in there. Is Jacob James your center, or is that where Matthew Jones goes? There's a long history of Ohio State guards that moved to center late in their career. Corey Linsley, Pat Elflein, Billy Price, who all did really well and are still doing well for themselves in the NFL. Is that the path for Matthew Jones in his last year of college football, kind of showing that he can play any of those 3 interior positions, gives you experience at the center position. Matthew Jones, I thought, played pretty well this year while he was battling a foot injury, I think it was, throughout the season. So some questions to be answered by Justin Fry in this offensive line. Look, you've got to get that group figured out. Now, they could still get the transfer portal. They've gone after, I think it was 4 different tackles that they've offered scholarships to and missed on, which, to me is a little perplexing. You have a place in Ohio State where you can go and market yourself, obviously, before leaving for the NFL. A lot of these guys are older guys, and Ohio State's continued to produce top offensive linemen, and there's a clear opportunity. But again, other factors at play there. So they've missed on those 4. They've started to look, after Luke Whippler departing, at some center options. I don't know if any scholarship offers have gone out, but there's been some communication there. So, look, Ohio State's definitely kicked the tires, offensive line, transfer portal guys. And if they don't get one in this window, which closes here in the next few days, the window opens up again in May after spring practice. And there will be more guys that jump into the portal between now and that point. So Ohio State will have some options, have some other guys that they can go after on the offensive line. And that's going to be true on the defensive side of the ball too. You've had, we mentioned the guys that are leaving, coming back. You got Lathan Ransom, who also announced here on Monday, shortly after, didn't announce. I think it was Bill Rabinowitz of the Columbus Dispatch talked to his father. He's planning on coming back. So you've got one of your starting safeties from this year. I haven't seen anything from Josh Proctor, which leads me, at least at this point, believe he's sticking around. I'd heard some things that he was at least considering looking into his options. But as of now, he remains still on the roster. He's a guy who obviously started the year as a starting safety for Ohio State, and then kind of saw his time diminish as Lathan Ransom came on. You'll have to fill that void from Ronnie Hickman leaving early, and now you'll also have Tanner McAllister, who is out of eligibility. But Ohio State did just get a transfer portal guy a couple weeks ago, Jihad Carter from Syracuse. He should step in probably right in that role that Tanner McAllister, kind of that slot safety, nickel corner position. So you have that probably filled with a transfer portal guy. It would not surprise me if Ohio State looks to add a transfer portal cornerback at some point. Again, they can do something after this window as more guys potentially enter the portal. That would give them the spring to see what they've got at corner. But you right now are looking at 6 scholarship cornerbacks heading into the 2023 season. And that's what the Buckeyes rode with this past year. But I think you'd like to add more depth. Denzel Burke is really your only true returning starter. Cameron Brown is out of eligibility. J.K. Johnson entered the portal and I believe ended up at LSU, if I remember correctly. So, look, the Buckeyes will have the opportunity to go add there. There's been some talk also about defensive linemen. I don't know how much they have looked into defensive linemen in the portal. But I think right now they're kind of focused on, let's see what we've got heading into spring practice. Let's give these guys an opportunity. You've got some young talent at the cornerback position and in the secondary. You want to take a look at, a guy like Sonny Styles. Where does he end up? You did get back, and I forgot to mention this, the linebacker position, both starting linebackers, Tommy Eichenberg, Steele Chambers, and that's huge. It will put off maybe seeing a guy like CJ Hicks starting sooner, but I think you like the idea of having Tommy Eichenberg and Steele Chambers back. I talked to CJ Hicks at the media day for the Peach Bowl, and he's an Ohio guy, and he seems very happy with his situation. So I'm not worried about. I know there's been some talk about, does Tommy Eichenberg coming back mean he's transferring? Look, I mean anything's possible, but I don't expect that. I think the defense, you got more good news than bad news there on that side of the ball in terms of guys leaving, guys going pro. And now it's about putting it all together. And that's what this offseason is really going to be. Both sides of the ball, frankly. We talked about the quarterback position. We talked about the offensive line. The secondary is going to be huge. I have said this a few times in different places, but I think a second year under Jim Knowles and this defensive staff is only going to help this group. I think I know the Buckeyes made some big strides this year in terms of turning this defense around, but it was never going to be a one-year project. It was always going to take some time to get this defense to where it wants to be. I think Jim Knowles too has to look in the mirror, look at what happened this year, and potentially I don't expect him. And I put this on our message boards the other day on Bucknuts. I don't expect him to change. I think he knows that what he does can be successful at this level, and he's had success. But I do think that you can tweak things, especially in these big time games. I mean, you weren't. The fact that he was competing in the Big 12 was great with Oklahoma State, but now you're in the Big 10. You're competing against a team like Michigan. You're going to the college football playoff. You hope you want to play with teams like Georgia. Things can be better on the defensive side of the ball, no doubt about it. So, look, there will definitely be some evaluation of the defensive side of the ball. And then the last thing I wanted to touch on before we get out of here for this week's Bucknuts Happy Hour is the staff changes that Ryan Day announced last week. The biggest of those being Brian Hartline taking over as offensive coordinator. This is a move that makes a lot of sense. You want to keep Brian Hartline in this program as long as possible. I don't think you needed to keep him happy. I think Brian's made it very clear that he's been happy at Ohio State. He likes working with the wide receivers. He's not necessarily eager to move on to anything else. But you also have to realize this is one of the hottest names in coaching right now, and people were going to come after him. Opportunities were going to come his way, and the chance now to step into a bigger role. This is the second straight offseason he's been promoted. Last year it was, I think, passing game coordinator title was added. This year he's filling in for Kevin Wilson, who departed to be a head coach again, and he's going to be the offensive coordinator. I think you're never going to have Ryan Day completely step out of running the offense. The fact that there's been talk about him giving up play calling is certainly interesting, because there's a lot that goes on in the coaching world, that being a head coach right now. So, does Brian Hartline take that on? He's never called plays before. It was not indicated when it was announced that Brian Hartline was going to be the offensive coordinator that he would call plays. We've not yet gotten a chance to talk with Ryan Day about this since Kirk Herbstreit kind of put this out here before the Rose Bowl. So it'll be interesting to see how they do that. If Ryan Day does give up play calling, and assuming there's not a major shakeup to someone on the staff, there definitely will be a first-time play caller, be it Brian Hartline, be it Justin Fry. Neither of them have called plays before, though Justin Fry was an offensive coordinator with UCLA under Chip Kelly. The thing I think with Brian Hartline, whether he's calling plays or not, is he's grown up with Ryan Day as his coach, his head coach, basically, or at least the offensive coordinator since he's been in the program. He knows the offense that Ryan wants to run. Now, you get in the booth, the heat of the game, all those things. I mean, that's something you'd like to have somebody with experience. And obviously, Ryan showed in that game against Georgia that he can still call a hell of a game. But if you being Ryan Day, think that it's better for the program as a whole to step out and take kind of a big picture view of this program and let other people kind of micromanage certain things like play calling, for instance, I assume that he is not going to hand those reins over to anybody without giving it some serious thought and making sure that this program doesn't take a step back. And so, Brian Hartline seems like he will be that guy, but again, no official word on the play calling situation. And then have to mention Keenan Bailey, a guy who's really done a lot behind the scenes for this program for a long time, has turned down opportunities elsewhere to remain with Ohio State, has been waiting for an opportunity to become a full-time head coach. And he got that again with Kevin Wilson leaving. Keenan Bailey become the tight ends coach. If you talk to players, and I've talked to a number of them, Keenan Bailey's a name that comes up a lot in terms of things he does. I think CJ Stroud said at the Heisman when he was asked about Keenan Bailey that he's a guy that will do a lot of the extra film work with these players. I think he called his office the cave or the cave. I think it was the cave because they go in there. It's dark. They're watching film. A lot of times it's late at night. Obviously, this changes a little bit when you become the tight ends coach. But this is another guy, a young, exciting prospect in the coaching ranks that Ohio State wanted to keep around. And I think this is a guy you'll hear more and more about, kind of as he continues to build his resume and work through being an assistant coach, full-time assistant coach now at Ohio State. And it'll be interesting I was asked the other day on the defensive side of the ball. I was on, I think Tyvis Powell, who's come on this show a couple of times, asked me about it. And if I thought there'd be staff changes on that side of the ball. Look, they've made these announcements. I don't know why you would wait if you were planning on making staff changes on the defensive side, but I don't see Ohio State parting ways with any of the three coaches that just finished their first year, that being Jim Knowles, Perry Eliano, and Tim Walton. I think they're going to give them the opportunity to work a second year, more of their guys that understand the system. They are working together more, which helps out. I wonder, and this is entirely speculation on my part, what happens with Larry Johnson this offseason. There's obviously been the retirement rumors for a long time. Does he want to fit with what what Jim Knowles wants to do? How is that all working? The defensive line once again was good, not great this year, and you have to wonder if it's all working as well as it could be I don't think Larry Johnson is a guy that Ohio State would push out the door because he's done so much. He's so well respected. But, if there's another guy, if he is pondering retirement, maybe you could shift him into a different role. I don't, this is just spitballing on my part. But I think if there is a change on the defensive staff, that would be the change that I would think would happen. I just don't see Ohio State moving on from any of the coaches that just had their first year. And, for a lot of the season, things were looking really good on that side of the ball. It was just that end of the year, you started to see some issues, and obviously in the Michigan and Georgia games. So an off season to try and correct things, but certainly something to keep an eye on in terms of what happens with Larry Johnson. And, there's a recruiting aspect of that too that Ohio State will want to be ahead of. So that's kind of a recap. I think we touched on pretty much everything that has happened with Ohio State over the past couple of weeks. Obviously, we usually do this Bucknuts Happy Hour later in the week, but we're recording on Monday because CJ Stroud made his announcement that he's going pro, which wouldn't have shocked anyone except that he waited a while and people got there were some crazy rumors out there that people bought into. Like I said before, I think CJ gave it some serious thought, but ultimately he was always going to head to the next level. I want to thank you guys all for tuning in. Thanks to Tim Hall from 97.1 The Fan for joining me for the first half of the show. I appreciate everyone who's helped do this throughout the football season. We're going to continue this throughout the offseason. It may not be every week. We're going to do some basketball as well. Obviously, things have not gone as well for the Buckeye basketball team the last couple weeks, but we'll dive into them. But obviously, football drives this train when we're covering Ohio State. So there will be lots of football talk throughout the offseason. Thank you, guys. I don't have a beer today, but I do have my water, so we'll end it like we always do. Like, subscribe, all that stuff. If you are feeling like you want more Ohio State info, feel free to, don't feel free, but sign up for Bucknuts. There's plenty of good stuff that we do over there, the message boards, all that, the VIP stuff that you get, and the whole 24/7 Sports Network. So thank you guys again. I appreciate it. I'm Patrick Murphy. Thanks to everybody for tuning in today, and cheers, Buckeye fans.